So now that we know that storing data in the web or on a server can make sense, another question which I see quite a lot is how can I connect Flutter, or the same is true for web apps actually, to a database? So how can I connect Flutter to a MySQL or NoSQL or whatever it is database? And with that, I mean a database that runs in the web on a server, not some on-device database. The answer here is you don't directly connect Flutter to your database because that's technically complex and also insecure. And because it's insecure, it's technically complex because it's basically not a scenario which people want you to use, and therefore there are no easy solutions to set up such a connection. Now, why is it insecure? If you're connecting your Flutter app directly to a database, that means that in your Flutter app code, you need to include your database credentials, your username and your password, to give you read and write access to the database. Now, when you ship your Flutter app to the app stores and users download the app from there, of course your source code is not easily available. Users can't read your source code when they install your app from the app store. But you can't rule out 100% that some users might get around that and might be able to get your app bundle and kind of uncompile it and find out your credentials. It is definitely very challenging and unlikely, but you can't totally rule out that this could happen. And then if people have your credentials for your database, they can access all your data of all your users. They can delete everything, they can copy everything. It's a nightmare. So you definitely don't want your database credentials in your source code. You want to have these credentials in a place which your users have no direct access to. And that would be a web server. Therefore, you typically connect Flutter to a web server by sending HTTP requests there, and then the web server in turn reaches out to a database. The source code of the web server is stored on that server. And yes, of course, theoretically, servers can get hacked, but there are protection mechanisms against that. Unlike your app, people can't just download it and then do their best to crack your code. Instead, they have to crack your server first, and if it's well protected, that will be almost impossible or, well, entirely impossible. And therefore, having a web server which actually stores your credentials and interacts with a database is way more secure. And this is hence the approach which you want to use. You have a web server in between which establishes the connection to the database, and your Flutter app only communicates with that web server. It's the same, by the way, if you're building a web app for the exact same reasons. So this is the approach we'll also follow in this module. Now, we'll not write a web server from scratch though, because this is not a web development course and we don't use Flutter or Dart to create a web server. Instead, we'll use a service which is free to use, Firebase, which gives us a web server out of the box where we don't have to write any code, which just works, and which also gives us a database attached to that web server to which it automatically communicates, so that we have an easy way of, well, interacting with that server and learn how Flutter talks to web servers.